You have been told your whole life that you are too sensitive. But what if that was never the problem? What if the real problem is that you have been using systems designed for a different kind of brain? Because most productivity advice assumes one thing, that you can ignore distractions, that you can push through noise, that you can operate the same way every day. But what if you cannot? Not because you are weak, but because you are processing more than the average person at every moment you sit there trying to focus, telling yourself to try harder, to be more disciplined, to stop overthinking. But the harder you push, the faster you drain, and it feels confusing. Because you are not avoiding work, you are overwhelmed by it before you even begin. And over time, this creates a quiet frustration. You start to believe something is wrong with you, that you lack consistency, that you cannot keep up. But here's the part no one tells you. The people who struggle the most with focus are often not the least capable. They are the ones running a heavier mental load in the background. They are noticing more, feeling more, processing more all at once. And in a world that rewards speed and simplicity, that kind of brain does not look like an advantage. It looks like a problem. So you try to adapt. You copy routines. You download productivity apps. You plan your days perfectly. But a few days later, everything falls apart again. Not because you failed, but because the system was never built for how you operate. And once you see this clearly, a different question starts to form. Not how do I become more disciplined, but what if discipline was never the thing I was missing in the first place? You open your laptop with a clear intention to work. Nothing complicated, just one task. But within minutes, your attention starts to scatter, not in a dramatic way, just small shifts. The brightness of the screen feels slightly off. A background noise you did not notice before becomes impossible. You tell yourself to concentrate. You push a little harder. Maybe open another tab to organize your thoughts. Maybe check something quickly. And now there are 5 tabs, then 10. But because your brain is trying to resolve too many inputs at once, by the time you return to the original task, your energy is lower than when you started, which makes no sense on the surface. You have barely done anything, yet you already feel tired. And this is the moment most people misinterpret. They assume it is laziness. They assume it is lack of discipline. So they respond the only way they know, by adding more pressure. They create stricter schedules, tighter routines, higher expectations. But this only makes the cycle worse, because the real issue was never effort. It was load. Your brain does not filter aggressively. It keeps channels open. It processes details that others ignore, the tone of a sentence, the tension in your body, the subtle changes in your environment. All of it gets processed in parallel. Most productivity systems are built for people who can discard that information without thinking. People who operate on efficiency by default. But if your brain treats everything as relevant, then forcing yourself into those systems is like trying to run heavy software on limited memory. It is not that the system is weak. It is that it is overloaded. And when overload becomes your daily baseline, inconsistency is not a character flaw. It is an outcome, not a lack of willpower, but a mismatch between how you are wired and how you are trying to work. The shift does not happen when you try harder. It happens when you see the pattern clearly, because up until this point, you have been treating the symptoms. You thought the problem was distraction, inconsistency, lack of discipline. But those were only surface effects of something deeper, something structural. At some point, you notice a small detail. On the days when your environment is quiet, when there are fewer inputs, fewer interruptions, you do not suddenly become more motivated. You simply become more functional. Your thoughts feel clearer, your decisions feel easier, your energy lasts longer. And this is where the realization starts to form. Maybe the issue was never your ability to focus. Maybe it was the amount you were forced to process before you could even begin. This is where a simple idea changes everything. Your brain is not slow. It is thorough. It does not react instantly because it is running deeper checks in the background. It connects more context, simulates more outcomes, evaluates more variables before committing to an action. And what you used to call overthinking is often just unfinished processing under too much load when you see it this way. Hesitation stops. Looking like weakness, it starts looking like a system protecting itself from overload. Your mind is not avoiding work. It is waiting for clarity. And clarity does not come from pushing harder. It comes from reducing noise. This is the moment most people miss. They try to upgrade their discipline, but discipline cannot solve a design problem, because if the input stays chaotic, the output will always feel inconsistent, no matter how strong. Your willpower is so the question changes, not how do I force myself to focus, but what needs to be removed so focus can happen naturally. And once you ask that, you stop fighting your brain and start understanding. So instead of trying to push through the noise, you start designing a system that removes it before it ever reaches you. Not a complicated system, just a few constraints that match how your brain actually works. The first shift is reducing input before demanding output. This means you do not begin with the task. You begin with the environment. You close everything that is not essential, not because you lack discipline, but because your brain processes everything it sees. So fewer tabs is not a productivity hack. It is a necessity. A clean space is not aesthetic. It is functional, even. Small changes like lowering noise or simplifying your workspace can remove a layer of cognitive load you did not realize you were carrying. The second shift is creating protected blocks. Not longer hours, but clearer ones. Instead of telling yourself to work all afternoon, you define a small window where nothing else is allowed in. No switching, no checking, no adjusting. Just one task in a controlled space. It can be 40 minutes, even 30. What matters is not the length, but the clarity. Because once your brain knows, it does not need to keep scanning for other inputs. It can finally commit its full capacity to what is in front of it. The third shift is treating recovery as part of the system, not something you earn after you are exhausted, because your type of brain reaches its limit faster, and ignoring that only leads to shutdown. So you schedule silence the same way you schedule work, stepping away, doing nothing, letting your mind reset. This is not wasted time. It is what prevents overload from accumulating. If you visualize it simply, imagine a stick figure sitting at a desk surrounded by signals, notifications, noise, clutter, everything pulling attention in different directions. And instead of forcing the figure to try harder, you remove the signals one by one the moment the environment becomes lighter. The same figure does not change, the effort does not increase, but the output improves naturally because the system is no longer fighting itself. When you start working this way, the changes are not dramatic at first. Nothing suddenly becomes easy, but something important becomes different. The resistance you used to feel at the start of every task begins to fade. Not completely, but enough that you can begin without negotiating with yourself for 20 minutes. Your energy stops swinging as much. You no longer have those extreme cycles of forcing yourself to work and then crashing right after. Instead, your days feel more even, more predictable. And that stability is what most people mistake for discipline. But it is actually the result of a system that fits you. Also notice that your focus lasts longer, not because you trained it, but because you protected it. Fewer interruptions means fewer resets. And fewer resets means your brain does not have to keep starting over, which saves more energy than any motivation technique ever could over time. The small sessions begin to stack, not in a visible way at first, but in a quiet accumulation. One clean hour today, another tomorrow. And slowly the gap between where you are and where you want to be starts to close. Not through intensity, but through repetition that you can actually sustain. And maybe the most important shift is internal. You stop blaming yourself for every off day. You understand that inconsistency is often a signal, not a failure. A sign that something in the system needs adjustment, not punishment. And this changes how you respond. Instead of pushing harder, you refine. This is where real progress lives. Not in doing more, but in doing what works consistently. Because when your system supports you, you do not need to rely on willpower to carry everything. And once that pressure is gone, you can finally move forward without constantly burning out. You were never the problem. You were just trying to operate in systems that ignored how your mind actually works. And when you keep forcing yourself into structures that do not fit, even the strongest effort will feel inconsistent. But once you step back and redesign the system, even slightly, things begin to shift, not because you change who you are, but because you removed what was getting in the way. And that is a quieter kind of progress, one that does not rely on pressure or constant motivation. You do not need to become tougher, faster, or more disciplined than everyone else. You just need an environment that allows your brain to do what it already does well. Because clarity is not something you force. It is something that appears when noise is reduced, and maybe that is the part most people overlook. Productivity is not about pushing harder. It is about creating conditions where effort actually works. Because when the system is right, even small, actions start to compound without resistance. You do not need a new version of yourself. You need a system that fits the one you already are. If you have ever felt stuck in that loop of trying harder and getting nowhere, comment system. And if you want to keep refining how you work without burning out, subscribe, because each week we simplify one part of the process, not to make you do more, but to help you do what actually matters.